Hello, everybody. Happy Thursday. I'm really happy to be here. My name is Stephanie Witkowski, and I'm here to co-lead the Technology and Language Revitalization session. So I just want to sort of start by thanking the Office of Indian Education for inviting us to talk about this topic. I also want to, again, introduce myself as the Executive Director of 7,000 Languages. I'm calling in today from what is now known as Southern California, but it is the stolen lands of the Tongva and the Hachman people. And so I want to acknowledge the Tongva and the Hachman people who are still here today, working diligently and passionately to restore and revitalize their language and culture, and reaffirm my commitment to language learning for all peoples in this nation. And contributing to a future that respects the inseparable bonds between language, land, and people. So now I want to turn it over to my co-presenters from Comanche Academy to introduce themselves.
Madoweka, Nananiatsa Marla Nonai. I'm with Comanche Academy, the Comanche Language and Cultural Curriculum Specialist.
Madoweka, Nananiatsa Crystal Rodriguez, and I am the Comanche language teacher at Comanche Academy Charter School.
Thank you. I'm so happy that our partners from Comanche Academy are here to talk a little bit about their language learning course in collaboration with us at 7,000. I also want to just pause and acknowledge all of our current and past language partners. I want to acknowledge that it is really due to our partners and their relationships that I myself and us the 7,000 languages are able to be here to evolve our practices and talk about language and technology. And so I just want to honor and acknowledge the trust that every community places in me and in our organization. It is a privilege to be part of these partnerships, and they are the foundation of our collective efforts to ensure that languages and traditions are not just preserved, but thrive. So our goals for this presentation are to, of course, introduce our work at 7,000 Languages, but also discuss online language learning programs, their strengths, their limitations, and also considerations that you might make before adopting a technology tool in your language revitalization work. We will demonstrate the 7,000 Languages software, Crystal and Marla will, which I'm very excited about. And then we'll talk a little bit about how you can create an online language learning course or series of materials for your work completely for free with our program. So once again, Crystal and Marla will talk more about their work at Comanche Academy. And then, of course, we'll return for Q&A. I'll actually say that, please feel free to write questions in the chat as we're talking. We'll take a little bit of a break about halfway through to pause. I'm happy to answer questions about 7,000 before our partners at Comanche talk about their awesome course. So I wanted to just start by introducing 7,000 Languages and our mission. Our mission is to empower communities around the world to teach, learn, and sustain their languages. And we do this primarily through providing online language learning resources. So sometimes this is called computer-assisted language learning, or CALL, right? It's an online platform. You can access it through a web-based platform, but also your mobile phone. So it really is that intersection of technology and language learning. That's primarily what we offer as an organization. But really, our mission expands way beyond that, and in particular to truly empower and give tools and knowledge and resources to the communities. I also want to just take a moment and pause and talk about our values, and that really anchor our work and guide us in how we do the work that we do. So I'm going to talk about each value in turn. It's really my hope that as we have these discussions about values, more organizations, honestly, that come alongside and work with Indigenous communities, share their values and share how their values influence their practices. And I hope that this will just be a point of further discussion. But I do want to take a moment and talk about each one. And the first is empowerment and ownership. This is really also where a lot of our conversations about Indigenous data sovereignty come into place. But essentially, it's the belief that Indigenous languages and the materials created for those languages belong to the community of ancestors, speakers, and descendants of those languages. And so we seek to cooperatively develop resources for each community to self-determine the future of their language. But we do not own the materials of 7,000 languages. We ensure that the communities have complete ownership of everything they create. And that includes raw data, but that includes formatted data. Our community partners, when they create materials or courses using our software, their name is on every material that they create, that this is copyrighted to them, their pedagogical materials and their language and all of their data. And so that's absolutely at the core of what we do. Respect and collaboration. We value the rights and traditions of others and all people, especially Indigenous people, when it comes to their language. So we approach our relationship with our partners as guests. We are the guests, and we recognize the leadership of the partners that we work with in every sense of the word, recognizing the leadership of language teaching and the traditions of language teaching. That's central to how we do our work. We do not come into these partnerships and say, well, these are the best practices. This is how you have to teach a language. But truly, it's about respecting and honoring the leadership that we know our partners in Indigenous communities have. Because we know that language revitalization work has been happening for a very long time in all of these communities and will happen way longer than our relationship. Moving on to diversity and inclusion, we recognize the value and importance of each and every language for their communities. And we believe every language strengthens humanity as a whole, and therefore each and every community deserves the opportunity to teach, learn, and sustain their language. That's regardless of the number of speakers, where the language is spoken, or who speaks the language. So we believe every language, every community deserves access to technology and to these tools so that their language can thrive. Which leads me to my last value at our organization, which is technology and community access. We believe communities should have access to technology and support that assists their language journeys in ways that reflect their cultural values. So we believe technology should reflect a community's culture, practices, and ways of knowing. I will say far too often, there is a technology tool or some platform or some organization, and they act like their tool is set in stone, is immovable, inchangeable, and therefore the onus is placed on the community, the speakers of the language, to change how they approach teaching the language or sharing the language. And we believe that that is not how it has to be at all. Technology is very much adaptable and moldable and can honor traditional ways of knowing. So a little bit just about our values, but again, I hope this is just an opportunity for us to have further conversations about this work. So I want to get into a little bit of the strengths and limitations and considerations when using technology and language revitalization. And I want to start by talking about why some communities might want to create online language learning materials. There's so many reasons why this might be a benefit to your language revitalization work. I'll say that online language learning materials can absolutely function as a valuable tool. They can reinforce and they can strengthen the language that is learned in conversation, is learned in communities, learned in schools or in families. And it can provide teachers, instructors, family members with that additional support in their language revitalization journeys and methodologies. Online language learning materials can also support learners who are not located near a centralized speech or signer community. I use speaker a lot, but this goes for sign languages as well, right? So we often know individuals might move out of a centralized community, or entire communities can be displaced. So online language learning materials can help to bring people back to a place where they can use language more regularly. Lastly, I think online language learning materials can really encourage new users and can really help people feel comfortable in the language. I know for me personally, languages don't actually come easy to me. It can be a really daunting task to learn a new language. It can be a really vulnerable task, especially when we're talking about Indigenous languages, right? Especially when we're talking about um, all of the history that comes with that and all of the connection that comes with that. And so at times it can be a really scary effort to learn one's language and one's ancestral language. But I think when you have online language learning materials, when you have the opportunity to listen to an elder and press that repeat button as many times as you need until you finally feel that comfort in repeating a word, or I got that phrase right, that gives you that kind of encouragement and that hope to continue on with your language revitalization journey. So many benefits, but I will say that really at its core, it must be noted that language survival is absolutely dependent on the language being spoken or used by a group of people. And so these tools will never replace those efforts, but they can absolutely strengthen them and lift them up. So let's talk about some of the limitations then, right? As I mentioned, this is language learning technology is just a tool. It will never revitalize or sustain a language all by itself. There must be individual speakers and community behind this work. And there's other limitations to language learning technology, which I'll talk about and which we should consider. There's often cultural and contextual nuances, sometimes regional dialects or variations that online tools will often generalize or group together. Many tools struggle to incorporate cultural and situational context, and there's a lot we can do to help mitigate that, but it's not the same as using language in person. Of course, there can be accessibility issues. Not everybody is tech savvy, right? And also communities as a whole may have limited access to internet, to modern devices, or even if there is access, sometimes it's incredibly cost prohibitive. Um, Technology is catching up with that. I will say more and more we're finding that we can use like our cell phones to do language learning, but still there are accessibility issues. Of course, language learning technology will never fully replicate the nuances of real life conversations and human interactions, all the little things, the pauses, all those little things that you can't capture in language that happen when you're connecting with somebody. And it cannot provide the immersive experience that comes with being in a community of native speakers. There can be loss of intangible cultural elements like storytelling traditions, humor, how that's expressed through language, idioms and phrases and how and why those are used. Hard to capture through technology. Often, and I will say our technology is guilty of this as well. There can be an overemphasis on literacy. Many language learning tools focus on reading and writing. And as I'm sure many of you know, most Indigenous languages are very steeped in an oral tradition, right? Some languages have only had orthographies or writing systems for the past 20 or 30 years. These are oral traditions, oral languages. And so to combine that with technology that's maybe overemphasizing the written language isn't always a fit. It isn't always the way languages have been passed down. And additionally, there can be a risk of misinterpretation, especially when the technology tool relies heavily on translations, relies heavily on translating an Indigenous language into English or another colonizer language, right? There's rarely a one-to-one translation. Rarely is that absolutely perfectly worked out. There's so many, nuances and cultural context that can be missed. So there are true limitations to technology, although it is a great tool as well. I want to talk a little bit on Indigenous data sovereignty, but I will say this is very, very shallow conversation. And so most of all, I just want to encourage everybody to go check out the amazing, amazing presentation let me go back. by Anita Lucchese. I hope I said that right. Anita Lucchese. That was on Tuesday. I listened to her recording, and she just did a really beautiful job talking about Indigenous data sovereignty. So I'd encourage you to watch that recording if you didn't already. But I'll talk a little bit about it in the context of language and technology. So I found this definition from the University of Arizona about what Indigenous data sovereignty is, so how we're defining it. So it's the right of a nation to govern the collection, ownership, and application of its own data, right? And it's very much connected to a tribe's inherent right to govern their people's lands and resources. We at 7,000, we define it as control over the collection, access, and use of all data. And data in particular, when we're talking about the context of language learning technology, usually includes audio recording. It can include written text. If this is how we write this word, and it can include stories, and it can include images and much more. So all of that data, it should very much be owned by the community, and it's the community's or the tribes, their right to say, this is data that can be collected, this is how this data can be used, this is who can access this data. So all of those things are included in our conversation on data sovereignty. So quickly, I'll just talk about a couple risks. I think this is really important because if there aren't really clear guidelines on who owns what data, there's a potential for commercial entities to use data without consent or without community benefit. And there can also be misappropriation. Sometimes data gets in the wrong hands, or data that is only meant, I'm talking about language data, so it feels so, that word data feels so techy, but like I'm thinking about language that is only meant to be used in certain contexts, in certain places, by certain people. I know sometimes it is so important that those spaces and those contexts are maintained. And if communities don't have control over that, there can be a risk of that language being put into spaces and used in a way which is unintended to, right? It could cause cultural harm. So there are some ways in which you can establish data sovereignty when working with language learning technology, by trying to ensure all digital projects are community-led and have explicit consent. And that the community is driving the consent process. The community is driving the agreement process. Communities having final say on how their data is used, stored, and shared. And really just, I think, as a community, taking that time to create your community-driven data policies that you share with technology providers will help ensure that you have that ownership, which is your right. So a little bit about how to collaborate with technologists, with companies or nonprofits or anybody, because it can be tricky to navigate this. I would say two things are critical. Ask tech partners how they respect and uphold data sovereignty principles. They should have an answer, and this is not demanding to ask that of any technology provider. Share your community-driven data policies. Share that with them first. This is how we control our data. This is what's important to us. How will you uphold this? And they should have an answer for you. Ask them how they manage their data. How do they store their data? How do they collect it? How do they decide who accesses it and when? How do they pull data if you need data? All of those things are amazing questions to ask, and all technology providers will have an answer. They should be able to explain that to you quickly and clearly, what they do with language data, all language data. Raw language data and also formatted language data. So what do you do once you put my data in your database and you create a language learning course? Then what? What data are you creating from that, and how do I get access to it? They should have an answer, and it should be clear, and definitely, continue to have those conversations and press on technology providers, because I promise they have their data policies too, and you should have access to them. So Again, I want to talk about a couple other considerations. So that was specific to data sovereignty. But there's some other considerations that I think communities should think about when adopting a language learning technology platform, because often it's like a big decision. Who am I going to work with? How do I know we're going to be good partners? Sometimes it's hard to know. Sometimes you're like already down the path with a provider before you sort of realize that maybe we're not as aligned as we thought we are. So as much as you can do ahead of that is it's great. I cannot recommend this resource enough. Check Before You Tech by the First Peoples Cultural Council. This is an amazing resource. So I took a little bit of some of their resources on this slide, but there's so much more that they have in that guide. But a couple things to consider. Infrastructure and support. How is their infrastructure supporting your language project, right? So again, we talked a little bit about data collection and data management, but will your writing system work with their technology tool? That's something to think about. If you have characters that aren't in a Latin script, can this technology handle this? Does your community or your tribal nation have the technology needed to create and access the language learning materials yourself, right? If this is a web-based platform, you can only access it online through a Windows-based computer, and you know the majority of your community members don't have that, that's going to be a hurdle. So how are we accessing our language? How can we use this tool? Have you identified individuals who will support and manage this project? Who are your folks who are going to manage this project internally? Is there a point person on the technology provider side that you know you can call at any time with questions that you have? What does their support system look like for you? How will you get the support you need and get your questions answered? And also something to think about when we think about infrastructure and support is who will be accessing these materials? Who is the target audience? Do they have what they need to access these materials? So maybe it's students in a school. Do they have what they need to learn from this platform? Maybe it's families at home. Do the families at home have what they need in order to access this? Because it's not helpful to have all of your language learning materials in a platform that nobody can access. The other thing to consider that we haven't touched on yet is sustainability and long-term engagement. I have heard way too many stories, and this has happened at every type of provider level. Big name language learning technology companies, independent web developers, and even folks who are hired by the tribal nation to work on the tribal language. No matter the situation, there's always a risk of that person or that company no longer functioning, no longer working for the tribal nation anymore. And then when that person goes or that company decides to no longer sell CD-ROMs or whatever it is, all of a sudden, all of these language materials, all of this work can no longer be used. It's not being updated. You need an individual in order to access it. So what are the long-term solutions? How long has the technology provider been around? And what are their plans for sustainability and longevity, right? How do they keep up with the changing technology trends? Will there be ongoing involvement with the community in updating and maintaining the resources? How will you continue to have a relationship with this technology provider after the course is done and it's there? Then what? What happens 5 years, 10 years down the road when you want to do more, or there's changes that need to be made, or there's even language that maybe you no longer want on the platform you need to have removed? What does that relationship look like? So think about that kind of long-term plan. So I'm going to move on to something slightly different. So we talked a lot about kind of the technology provider itself, and I want to quickly talk about some considerations that are specific to the curriculum development process when thinking about using language technology tools in the language revitalization sort of space and journey and work that you're doing. Again, this is a very shallow, right? This is not the most in-depth curriculum development slide. It's a bit shallow, but I just want to touch on a couple points that I think are important as you approach your curriculum development, thinking about technology. The first one is really assessing the needs and goals of the community. Obviously, that's always the first step when creating materials, right? But what are the specific needs of the community with regards to language learning, with regards to language learning and technology? What are people looking for? Are they saying, I just really want to practice my pronunciation. Please help me with my pronunciation. Or are they saying, like, I really just need some language to use with my 5-year-old. I just want to speak some language at the dinner table, right? So what are the goals? As much as possible, collaborate with, of course, native speakers and educators and cultural experts. Even if they're not tech savvy, please invite them into this process as you create this work. Think about your pedagogical approach. How will you use this technology with other language learning methodologies you maybe already have in place? Are you going to combine digital tools with traditional teaching methods? Will you embed these technology tools in a traditional classroom setting? Will you try to use the technology to create an immersive and interactive learning experience? So these are all kinds of things to consider. How will this technology complement the work that we're already doing? Of course, you want to think about the types of content you might need to gather, you might need to create. Maybe you need new materials for vocabulary and grammar pronunciation. Maybe you need context and you need real life scenarios. If you want to do a conversation-based activity, you might have to do that work of sort of thinking through and gathering sort of real life scenarios that you want to start to build up to using the technology tool. Of course, regular feedback, regular review, everything is changeable. So nothing's ever, you can always go back and go, that didn't work quite like what we had hoped it would. Let's go back and reevaluate. So just ensuring that digital tools complement rather than replace traditional learning methods, that they really uplift your ways of knowing and your ways of teaching and learning language. And making sure that the curriculum is, again, accessible to all learners, which I'm sure those of you who are in education, you already know about making your work accessible to all learners. But sometimes when you add that additional layer of technology, it's a little extra work to think, okay, well, now I have this technology tool, but how, again, am I still connecting with different types of learners? So what can you create? So many different types of courses. There's not just one type of online language learning course that you can create. You can, of course, go the route of beginner, intermediate, and advanced. You can create vocabulary and grammar-based courses. A lot of platforms are set up to handle that really well. But you can also create conversation-based courses using technology tools. Or you can create story and original text-based courses. With a community I worked with, there unfortunately weren't any native speakers left. There were a couple people who are still members of the language. And so much of how we taught the language was by gathering recordings and stories of ancestors who had passed away and then creating language learning materials around that. You can do that in technology too. Land-based learning. It sounds really counterintuitive, right? To do land-based learning online, but how can we take those fundamentals of a land-based learning pedagogy and embed that in online learning too? We can. I don't know, back in like 2016, a really big deal was everybody was playing Pokemon Go. And so there'd be like kids just walking around, but they'd always have their cell phone in front of them. So they were engaging in the world, but very much through a technology tool. You can do that with language learning. You can do that with these tools. We have one activity, which if there's time, I'll show you. You can like actually use it VR headset. You could like have a 360 panorama image and you can have hotspots. So you can kind of like be on land, although through technology. And of course, you can create lessons that very much connect with specific practices, times of year, traditions, and use that as the anchor point. So you can do all of that through language learning technology tools as well. I want to pause here and talk a little bit again. So we've talked a little bit about what you can create. We talked a little bit about the types of providers there, but this is kind of bringing it all together. And I really love this chart. This is by Carrie Chu. She had this chart in her resource called Learning in Relation, which is a free resource, which I also highly recommend. I should send out all these links to all these things I'm recommending. There's so many great resources out there. She did a really wonderful job of surveying different providers, different technology providers out there, and surveying them for what you can include in their technology platform, right? So if you know it's critical that you have text-based activities, then that kind of helps you decide which providers for you. We're here, 7,000 languages up at the top. This isn't an exhaustive list. There's a lot of different ways in which you can match up with a technology provider. So of course, you can use an established language learning platform, Rosetta Stone, Duolingo, us at 7,000. Things to think about, there may be upfront costs. Some of them can be very cost prohibitive, unfortunately. There may be very long waits in order to add your language if there's an interest. And there may be limitations on some of the features. But there's also tons of free generators and you don't have to wait and there is no cost. Quizlet's a great one. Anki, Memrise are great ones as well. Free online. Sometimes there's limitations on the features. They're often usually kind of like flashcard based activities, very vocabulary based activities. So sometimes that works, sometimes not. So there might be limitations. You also might not have as much control of who is accessing what language. So that's something to consider. Of course, you can hire an independent software developer, right? There's independent software developers you can hire as contractors. You can bring somebody on board in-house, staff member. Of course, there's definitely going to be upfront costs. There might be additional costs, not just the upfront cost to build your technology tool, but to maintain it as well. And there still can be limitations, and that's based on the developer skill level, what they can or cannot create for you. So all things to consider, but there are certainly lots of tools out there. There's a lot to explore. It's really just finding, I think, that perfect balance of kind of what your goals are, what you need to include in the provider's platform. And then I think also finding a provider that aligns with your beliefs and the way you want to go about learning and teaching the language. So this is a little bit about our platform. I don't want to talk too much about it because I know Crystal and Marla will show you. It's more fun to show you the features too than talk through it. So I will not talk so much about this, but I'll just tell you what I think is a little bit more important, which is how we work with our partners. At 7,000 languages, we feel like the first step and the most important step is truly to determine the community's goals and then provide them with the curriculum development support and any other support that's needed. And sharing some best practices regarding maybe if you have to elicit vocabulary items or you have to record somebody, sharing those practices and this new work. Sometimes one of the biggest hurdles is, like, how are we going to go about getting all of these recordings and kind of coordinating, collaborating with all these folks to get the quality audio we want online? And it's tricky and it's not as much fun as it sounds when you're sitting in a recording booth for hours and you're like, oh, can you do that one more time? And you have an elder and you want to respect their time and they're, sometimes it's tricky. But also most importantly, for us at 7,000 is training our partners how to use the software and encouraging and empowering them so that others can create materials in perpetuity. I think for us, that's really, really critical in terms of ensuring that the community, again, has that control over the work that they're doing so that no community is ever reliant on us to create materials in their language. They know how. The technology tool is, it's a learning curve. Everybody has to learn new technology, but it's usable and there's no reason why any community has to go through us to create materials for their community. Also, there's no timeline to our support. So once we've built a partnership, we work with our communities for as long as they need. So we don't, we're not like, sorry, the contract was only for a year. See you later. Good luck, right? Really maintain that relationship and ensure that our partners have everything they need. So that's just a little bit generally, right, about language learning technology, really with regards to kind of computer-assisted language learning tools. There's other technology providers, of course, as well that provide dictionary tools, but I hope that was a good overview. And I'm very excited to once again hear from our partners at Comanche Academy, Crystal and Marla. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now so that they can share their screen. But in the meantime, I'm happy to answer any questions that might have come through.
Yes, so there was one question that came through so far. So I've always been curious about the balance between disagreements and compromise when it comes to language revitalization. In my experience, if we don't find common ground, we risk stalling the movement and losing access to the knowledge of elders who are passing on. I have seen too many languages disappear when their last elder passes away. How can we preserve the regional identity of a language while also making sure it is codified for future generations to learn?
That's a great question. And I really, appreciate that urgency of that situation because it can feel really urgent. Um, you know, definitely this is a question I think of language documentation and trying to, it seems like in this scenario, really trying to document as much as possible, even if there isn't agreement yet on how that documentation or how that data should be used. So you can go about documentation in so many different ways. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just try to gather stories and recordings, language, in use authentically, like trying to get two people into a room just talking about different things. And this is like I'm like wearing my linguist hat right now a little bit to sort of talk about the types of language that is really critical to try to document. So that later, if you even need to reconstruct language, you have like the grammar and the vocabulary, but also like the grammar and the way the language is used. So I absolutely recommend that, and then of course there's conversations about what to do with that and where to store that. So I would absolutely recommend looking into archives. Specifically, a lot of archives are housed at universities, but they aren't all. And there are some archives that do a great job of working with Indigenous communities in particular and really understand the sensitivities of working with Indigenous languages. So there's a ELAR, the Endangered Languages Archive, I think is something like that. ELAR is a great archive where if you have language, you have data, you want it to be stored safely, you're not sure how you're going to use it yet, but you know that you kind of just want to capture it and keep it safe. I would recommend, really establishing a relationship with an archive. So that would be my answer to that question. And then later, if you decide, hey, we want to put it in a language learning tool, you have it.
I think too, and this wasn't a question, but I know there's a lot of talk in the chat about like honoring specific dialects or variations of language. So I think something that has stuck out to me about 7,000 languages is it seems like, tools that are very based in like starting with the community and working tightly with communities. It seems like there's some room to maybe preserve more like community specific like language or create more community specific language tools. So I don't know if you can talk like a little bit about that, maybe what to look for generally, and then like how, what that looks like for y'all.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, we really, when we approach like how we do our work, we really see ourselves as working with community, work in partnership with community. And sometimes there are multiple communities or community groups or organizations or collectives of individuals who are working on the same language. And that's okay with us because our relationship is with a community or a school or a nation. Our relationship is not with the language, right? So we definitely leave space for that, for multiple partnerships to emerge on the same language. And we have on our website, and I think you put the link, there's a partnership page. And so we point to, there's some policies and practices we have in place regarding how we work with people. A big thing is community permission, too. Sometimes there's a lot of folks who are like, yeah, I learned this language. So like I can speak on behalf of this community. And that's so important to us too, that we really do our due diligence because we straddle that line. I think a lot of people do in language learning of wanting things to be accessible, but also wanting to honor like the communities and their ways of governing their sovereignty, who has the ability to approve languages being used in this context or that. So it's so important for us to make sure we have the proper permission, we go through the proper channels, and so we establish those relationships with organizations. So that's kind of how we approach that work, and we're constantly evolving it. I will say, I think in this work, any organization who feels like, yeah, we're doing it right. We know what we're doing it right, is like a yellow flag, because we have to keep having these conversations. We have to keep evolving how we approach this work, especially when it's community led, because every community, every nation is unique. They have their own, ways of doing things, their own processes, their own procedures. So we really defer and respect, the nations or communities or schools or nonprofits that we work with.
Thank you, Stephanie. Yeah, so I think that definitely brings up a point for me too, is like Stephanie was talking earlier about, things to look at, but really looking at the language that, people and providers use about like how they conduct their work, and looking at things that, they've produced before. Is it language based, or is it community based? Because I think that's very important to a lot of our communities. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. And that's all the questions we have at this time. So we'll take more questions at the end if anyone has any more, but I'd love to let Crystal and Marla share some things that are happening at Comanche Academy.
Does it sound on?
Yeah, I think you're good. Can you hear us?
So what is Comanche Academy? We are a public charter, place-based elementary school, currently serving grades pre-K to third grade, with the intention of adding a grade each academic year. We strive to provide an inclusive, culturally sustaining, and academically rigorous education for all students. We teach all Oklahoma standards, in addition to a Comanche language and culture. We have currently roughly 10 fluent speakers. Of those, we also have those that may understand but do not speak the language. We have those that may write phonetically only and can speak the language. And we have those that may write according to the adopted alphabet and can't speak the language. So what has been done for language revitalization? Back in the early 1990s, several concerned tribal members organized to preserve the language. Community classes were held, language was brought into our tribal child care facilities, dictionaries and flashcards were produced, and the Comanche language department was established. language revitalization through the Comanche Academy. Currently, we have 86 students, and they receive 75 minutes of Comanche language instruction each week. Our teachers also receive Comanche language instruction, which allows them to implement language in the classroom throughout the day. We're able to incorporate the language into the daily school activities and school-sponsored events.
So some barriers to language acquisition. So for us at the Academy, the kids are given 75 minutes a week with Comanche language instruction. And so they're learning, pretty quickly. And then whenever they go home, they don't have anybody to speak to because either their parents, well, of course, their parents aren't fluent, but they may have a little bit of knowledge with some words here and there. And then their grandparent may know a little bit more, but doesn't speak. So that's one of the barriers that we have is they have no one to speak to whenever they get home. And then we have accelerated learners, and then we have some that are learning at a slower pace. So while we may be teaching in class, a lesson, you may have those students that just get it on the first class over that lesson. And then you have others that, we may sit at that lesson for a while. And so then we also have, because we work with pre-K to third grade, they're not really fully literate yet. They're still learning in English. And so introducing the new alphabet system to them now is a little too much for pre-K, I'd say even up to third grade. So we haven't even really introduced that. They see it, but we haven't really, spent any time on it necessarily. So that's another barrier when it comes to getting them literate as far as being able to read it and to write it. So really, we just focus on the oral part of it. And then another barrier for us here at the Academy is attendance issues. So whenever, we have students with high, absences, well, then they're not going to learn, as well. And using technology for language revitalization. So our students, of course, they know how to, even the pre-K, they're very tech savvy. They can tell you how to work your phone, your tablet, if there's something going on, they can help you with it, usually. The smart board. Most of them know how to operate devices such as phones, tablets, and smart TVs and all those. And then we can use their love for technology to teach language. And so, for example, whenever they do well with language class or just even in their homeroom classes, their treat is their tablet time. So they really enjoy that almost as an incentive. And then another benefit for technology is that, you can use it at school. And there are some days that we have, what are they? They're virtual days, or we have remote days. So the benefit is that they can use it at home as well. Why 7,000 languages? So with 7,000 languages, what we really appreciate is that we get to design our own curriculum. We get to build this out, and it is a collaborative effort. We have a language department as well with the Comanche Nation. And so we partnered with them, and there's some elder speakers that we have there that help us with different ways to say words or pronunciations and all of that. So we get to partner with elders, with language speakers, with our own language department and educators to design our own curriculum. So we're not using somebody else's curriculum, or someone else isn't telling us how we have to do it. 7,000 languages allows the use of audio, images, and video. And with the images, one of the benefits with the images is that we can have native representation in our images. That's really important for us, for the kids to see themselves in these pictures, with family, with any of our verbs or anything like that. It looks like them. The images, the people look like them. Also, our families can learn alongside their child, so that when they do go home, their families can understand them and they can learn as well so that whenever they want to speak, they can speak for different situations, whether they're at home or in public or wherever, they can speak with their kids and understand them. And then we customize the lessons. So for example, if we want to say, for example, we want to work on home items, so maybe the kitchen or something like that, we can, make a lesson specifically for the kitchen, and just however, whatever it is that we want to teach, we get to customize that lesson specifically for whatever situation, whether that's maybe the powwow world, we can do a lesson on the powwow world, your regalia, or if we want to do one for your clothes, we can do a lesson on clothing. And then we also get to decide, was probably the most important part for us. We get to decide who accesses our language materials. That was very important for us. And we did have that talk with Stephanie about who does have access to our language. Because again, that can be misappropriated and things like that. That was a real concern for us. Challenges. Some challenges with technology for language acquisition is that not all of our, some of our children may be raised by their grandparent or an aunt, and sometimes older generations or even just people who are intimidated by technology. That's an issue where maybe they don't want to, get online to learn language just because they don't know how, or the fear that they don't know how. And then also another challenge is some of our community may not agree with putting our language out there like that online. And that is a concern for plenty of our community members. And then public access and who has access. So for us, each of our kids will have an account, and then their family members. So we can set up accounts for each of their family members so they can all learn at their own pace. And it's nice to have that control to be able to give that to whoever we want to have that. And then some of our material is not for the general public, such as maybe our Native American church songs or some oral stories, they may not be for the general public. So we can limit, who has access to what. Benefits. So again, we get to decide who has access and what level of access they have. We can upload our stories, our songs, processes, culturally relevant activities for our students and our families. An example for that would be recently we put up a teepee, and a lot of these things are being lost or it's not being passed down. So we recorded putting up the teepee, all the steps, and that way we can upload that. So for those families out there that maybe have never been able to put up a teepee, or for those that just don't know how or would like to, and so they can watch it step by step. And being able to upload videos really helps with that, along with another activity we did, making a tea dress. So that's the style of dress that Comanches use. And a lot of people don't know how to make those. A lot of people want to get their children into the powwow world, and they don't know how to make things like tea dresses or regalia. And so that's something that we can, make videos of, documenting step-by-step process. So that way our families have access to that. Another great benefit is assessments. So assessments can be built in pre-assessment and a post-assessment. So that way you can track, what your students are learning, and, maybe if you need to change your approach or if you need to work on pronunciations, things like that, you can really track that, which is also beneficial for grant reporting or just data collection in general. And then students can learn at their own pace. So if you see that you have a learner that maybe is just really eager to learn, you can set the lessons up to where you can give them access to several units. So that way they can just work at their own pace. Or if you see a student is not doing as well, then you can just keep them at that spot until they, score a little higher. And then accessibility, that's really important. So you can access 7,000 languages through a desktop, a laptop, tablet, and a mobile device. So now I'm going to show you one of our lessons that we have. Uh-oh. Okay. And I'm going to show you how to log in as well.
It's just so you know, it's still sharing the slideshow. So you might want
Oh,
to
is it?
maybe have to
Okay.
stop
Okay.
sharing and share your browser screen.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Happens to me all the time. There's also lots of security. The platform will log you out after 10 minutes of inactivity, which is good, but
Yeah.
also when you're trying to
Right.
present, annoying.
Okay. All right, here we go. So we're going to go into the learning portal, and I'm just going to show a few different things. And again, keep in mind that we are working with pre-K to third grade. So again, they're not exactly literate, fully literate. So we're going to go over numbers, a lesson on numbers. And so this is the preview option. We can go on here and I'm just going to select this one. It's a short lesson. And so for this first set, I have 5 units and there's 10 lessons with 5 items in each lesson. So with this preview, you can go on here and it will say the word for you. Oh, there it goes. And so then they can see the 0 here for gehet, for 0. And go on to the next one.
Sama.
So this is just introducing the numbers. So it will say it in Comanche, and then it's written here in English, and then the image along with it. And then we're going to look at that on a different one that we can use. Recognize and say it. Now some of these aren't going to be for your pre-K and your kinder groups. Some of them may be more for second or third grade for us.
Pahit.
So that it says the word for you, bahit, and then show the meaning. And then it asks where you write. So that's another one.
Wahat.
And then you can also do this turtle button down here,
Wahat.
and it will slow it down so that way they can hear how to say it if they want to try to practice. And then the recognize and write it, we don't use because again, we're not focusing on the literate part of the language. Produce and say it. So then it shows just the image and then the word in English.
Wahat.
Then you see if you were correct on that how to say it in the language.
I really like the versatility
Yes.
of 7,000 languages.
And then another option you have is multiple choice. So we can go in here on multiple choice. And so here's the English up here, 0. So then you can go through and hit the speaker
Wahat.
and hear it.
Sama. Hayerokwet. Kehet.
That's 0. And then another neat feature is, let me see where it's at. Produce it and say it. So
Pronunciation
you can
practice is the one with the dial. If
oh
that's
yeah, that's right.
Mhm.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so this is a neat feature. Okay.
Kehet.
So it's going to say the word for you, and then you have the button down here to record. And then you can listen to
Kehet.
that one, and then you can hear your own. So that way you can see, like, are you saying it the right way?
Kehet.
Slow it down. So yeah, that's what we have. And again, we're up to third grade, so there are plenty more that you can do. But for our age that we're teaching, those are some of the ones that we use. Yeah. So Thank you so much.
Mhm.
We'll hand it back over to you, Stephanie.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I loved seeing what you guys had created. I also saw a colors lesson and body parts. So, I mean, so there's, you can incorporate so many images. We're working on new activities as well. So there's less reliance on the written word, and you'll hear just an audio and then you have to click an image, which is going to be really, really helpful for those young learners that are still learning to read and write. I'm going to share my screen once again, and I'll close it up. But thank you both so much for sharing that. That's really beautiful to see. Okay. So, yeah, so again, through our software, a single elder or a single speaker can really teach hundreds of students. And once again, I just want to reiterate, and I think Casey did a great job of driving this point home. We really want to amplify the voices of the elders and boost the efforts of community leaders. We want our technology to complement the work that we know you're all doing. You've been working so hard to revitalize your language. We hope this technology just supports and uplifts that work. So once again, just want to highlight, what we do at 7,000. This software is 100% free to communities. This software is completely free. We don't charge any communities ever to use the software, and it will always be free. You will never pay for this software later. There's no limit to how many people you can have. So really, it's truly donated from company Transparent Language Software, and it is completely free for communities to use. In addition to that, training on how to use it is also free. Once again, the community, you can copyright these language materials to Community Academy, your tribal nation. You own all of your data, and not just raw data, right? But actually all exported data. You can use the data. Not only do you own the data, like we don't retain any exclusivity, right? We never say, oh, well, you created a language course with us, so you can't go create a language course with provider over here. It's your data. It's your language. You can use this data anywhere you want. And in fact, we can even help facilitate using your data in other places. For example, if you want a dictionary as a companion to the language learning materials you create with us, we will help facilitate sending that data. Or if you have an archive that you work with and you want to send that data to an archive, we will facilitate that safe passage of your data. And additionally, courses that you create, not all though, you are absolutely allowed to have materials that are just for your community. But if you do decide you want some materials to be public, they're available for free for anybody who wants to learn really easily at 7000.org. So those are just some highlights of our program. I'm going to talk about, we have one other program which might be of interest to some folks. It's a summer fellowship where we really try to highlight like individuals who are early in their language revitalization journey with a paid opportunity to work on their language. So if you're interested, follow us at 7,000. Be on the lookout. We will announce that in a month or so for our 2024 Summer Fellowship Program. So we provide them with training and tools, but also financial support because this is work. So please don't hesitate to email me. That's my email address, or you can also email us info@7000.org. Visit our website. In particular, I would encourage you to visit this link, 7000.org. Partner with us where you can learn more about our stance on data sovereignty, can learn more about our policies and practices regarding partnership, and you can play around with more activities as well, because there's over 40 different activities. So there's really a lot to explore, but we're so excited to work with anybody who thinks like this technology might be a good complement to the work that they're doing. So, oh, you had a final slide. Did you want me to share the final slide?
Yeah, you can pull it up. Yeah, sure. I don't know
Let
if
me
it has
pull
the
that up,
keynote
but
on
I just
there.
want to, I'll pull that up while we're answering questions. But
Sure.
I just want to once again thank you, Marla and Crystal, and everybody at Comanche Academy. And I want to thank you all for inviting us to share a little bit more and to talk about language and technology and all that comes with it.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, all three of you, so much, Marla, Crystal, and Stephanie. I really appreciate it and your willingness to share today. So we did have a question in the chat about if you're able to select your speaker or speakers for the technology. So when I know like when Crystal and Marla were sharing like the clips and things, are you able to select your speakers for that?
Yes and no.
So-
You guys can answer.
Oh, well, so whenever we did the recording sessions, we did try to incorporate elders and learning people that were learning, along with people that have like a medium fluency. So we did do that. But as far as I don't know if there is that option. I guess that would be where you would pick up on that question.
Say for each activity, there's only one audio recording. But there are some activities too that are conversation-based activities where you can have multiple speakers having a conversation with each other that you toggle between. But usually it's for each kind of like entry, there's sort of like one text and one audio file, if that answers that person's question. But you can dictate as the community, whomever you would like to be, the voice or the speaker in the activities.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. So you can select your speaker. It's just one speaker per clip,
Yeah.
essentially.
Yeah. Exactly right.
Great. I don't see any other questions, but if you have any other questions, feel free to throw those in the chat or put them in the Q&A. You should also at this time see the survey at the bottom right. Please make sure you take that survey before you leave the session. Today, the feedback is super helpful. You'll also have an end of event survey after our final keynote. Don't forget, we do have a closing keynote this year, but to be sure to take both surveys. I think. Okay, yeah, that's what I wasn't sure if they had the keynote on there. Yeah, so I don't see any other questions at this time. Brenda did say I wanted to read this for y'all because I know it's hard to see both the platform and the Zoom at the same time. But Brenda did say a great presentation on how you're using this language app for our Comanche Academy folks. And she said that it was helpful to see it and have you explain some concerns you've encountered and how you work through some of those barriers. So I just wanted to call out that piece of gratitude for you all.
Thank you. We appreciate that.
Of course. And I am so grateful to all of you for being here today to share, and for all of you in the session that took the time to come to this session and listen and share your thoughts in the chat. There's been a lot of great thoughts in the chat around like data sovereignty and integrity of like language dialects and the community-based aspect of language. And I really appreciate all of those conversations and the other tools and things that people were sharing in the chat as well. So thank you all for your engagement today. The closing keynote starts at 4:45, well, Central Time, sorry, 45 after the hour, wherever you are. And then you can also take this time to chat on the discussion board or download files from the resource library as well. You'll see that there are links here. So if you look on this left-hand side of your platform screen, you'll see like partnering with 7,000 Languages and their homepage as well. If you want to learn more about their fellowship or creating language technology with them, you can find those things on their website there too. All right, Wado, thank you everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.